Hello everybody and welcome back to another Side Knows the Score video where we are almost done with the international break. Yippee, you get the confetti out, the champagne, you name it, beers, get it thrown. We're nearly back to club football now. And we cannot wait, can we? We cannot wait. So look, this is recording just before the second England game, so look, they did win 2-0 in the first one. Yeehaw, big on the World Cup. And then we can get invested in international football once more, once club football season is done and dusted. Speaking of which, we will now be getting on to Game Week 12. But as always, if you can please drop a like, subscribe, and post your comments below any predictions. I will look out for them. And let's get straight into it, where we are beginning Game Week 12 at Turf Moor with Burnley versus Chelsea. So Burnley are sat in 17th with their head just above the relegation zone thanks to goal difference. Now Burnley are one of those sides, newly promoted sides this year, where they are making it difficult for teams, aren't they, for the most part, especially at home, and can see them making this a little bit uncomfortable for Chelsea. Look, they'll obviously be disappointed to lose against West Ham. I thought the performance wasn't particularly amazing anyway down there at West Ham. And I thought maybe the 3-2 and that second goal was a little bit flattering for them. I feel like West Ham probably deserved to win it by at least a 2-goal margin. So yes, it was definitely a deserved defeat for Burnley on the road. But we are at home. And, looking at Chelsea, they do create a lot of chances, don't they, in games where their biggest difficulties so far this season have come through, well, either too many red cards early on the season and finishing their dinner. So yeah, once they get in front of the goal, look, they do create chances, and I believe they have actually created the most goal scoring opportunities in the Premier League, or at least like the bigger chances in the Premier League too. Yet they are one of the highest in the league for missed clear-cut chances, so something to consider and take on board. I do feel this game will, of course, be in Chelsea's favour in terms of possession, shots, corners, you name it. It will all be in Chelsea's favour. So I think I'm going to be going with the easy prediction here. I'm going to go with a Chelsea win. I feel like 2-1. I feel like Burnley could get something on the counter and just make it a little bit awkward at times for Chelsea. They weren't disastrous against Arsenal, probably could have scored, but I don't feel like Arsenal got out of second gear that game. I feel like when they got the 2 goals, they were fairly comfortable. I feel like they'll make it a bit more awkward here for Chelsea, and they have to do something now, don't they? So 2-1 is the final score on that one, which then brings us on to Bournemouth versus West Ham. And look, Bournemouth got annihilated scoreline-wise away at Villa Park, didn't they? However, I would argue that the scoreline was flattering for Villa, and they'll be looking to put that right here against the Hammers, who look to have gotten their act together, haven't they? With back-to-back wins at home against Newcastle and relegation candidates Burnley. So some huge wins there, which has obviously got them closer to getting out of the relegation zone. So happy days for them. But, with Bournemouth, there's always goals, and even with West Ham's resurgence, I can only see one winner out of the 2 here. So I have to back the home team. And I'm going to go for a couple of goals here, actually, because I think Bournemouth will slot a few past West Ham. So I'm going to go with 3 goals for Bournemouth and just the 1 here for West Ham. I mean, it will be interesting to see if they can, get back after, their 2 wins. Well, this is for West Ham, that is. They had 2 good wins, haven't they? The midfield didn't look too great until the recent changes by Nuno. So we'll see. This is a real first test for West Ham, and this we will definitely see where West Ham are at. Brighton versus Brentford. So Brighton sit in 11th and still believe they will push on and fight for a European spot, as they do have a good squad there, shown recently too, by still winning even with a number of key players out. Now Brentford surprisingly joint on points with Brighton, and I say surprising because surely not many would have foreseen this happening before the league kicked off. They've had some good wins against the likes of West Ham, Newcastle, and Liverpool recently. So their only win on the road was against West Ham, who at the time did look pretty dreadful. So it's difficult to take too much from that particular game. Brighton haven't lost since April at home, and I think based on this and Brentford's form away from home, this does have to go in favour of the home team, with a Brighton securing a fairly tight 2-1 victory. Fulham versus Sunderland, and Fulham ever so slightly above the drop zone by 1 point, where they've had some tricky fixtures recently, which has seen them losing 5 out of the last 6. So 3 points out of 18 has seen them plummet down the table. So look, Fulham's transfer business wasn't anything special, and it could spell danger for Marco Silva and the Cottagers. I still think they'll be fine come the end of the season. However, they could quite easily slip further down the league here. And you expect investment from Fulham in January, don't you? Sure, they've got some wiggle room with PSR, given the somewhat lack of spending in the summer. So I think that overall they will be fine. However, we are talking about the here and now, and Sunderland are just so hard to beat, and it's absolutely amazing they're in 4th position, which does show with some good investment along with an adaptable manager, it is possible to stay up in the Prem, and it needs to be the model for any newly promoted team moving forwards. They can score from all sorts of situations, and physically they battle for every second, for every ball of every game. So, we could potentially see Fulham slip down into the drop zone here if results go against them as well. And it could be unwise to not go for a Sunderland win here. So, I do think it will be tight. And I was conflicted with a draw. But Sunderland won't be afraid after beating Chelsea at Stamford Bridge and getting a point against top of the league Arsenal. So, for me, I'm going to go with a very tight 1-0 win for Sunderland away from home. Liverpool versus Forest, and Liverpool have been overtaken by arguably their most fierce rivals. I mean, depending on which Liverpool fan you speak to, of course, whether it's Man U or Everton. Where, we thought they would have thought they were getting back to their old ways of winning after Arne Slot looked to have found good balance across the team. They faltered with a 3-0 loss at the Etihad. Whereas Forest are now unbeaten in 3 with a huge win against Leeds, which, by the way, was a well-deserved win, annoyingly to say as a Leeds fan. They do have good squad depth, and surely they can't be relegated with them almost guaranteed to keep going up the league at this point, in my humble opinion. Question here is, which Liverpool side shows up? Now, if it's the one who played Villa and Madrid, then it could be a relatively comfortable day at the office. But if it's the one that we've seen, against the Palace defeat, for example, then that could definitely, since the Palace defeat, then that could spell danger, as Forest could have found their newfound confidence, basically, after going 3 unbeaten under Sean Dyche. So, look, it's still at Anfield, and I have to factor this in. So I'm going to go with a narrow win. Although I do feel Liverpool will create a good number of chances overall this game, I just feel like the confidence still isn't there. And I think Forest might actually get a goal themselves. So I'm going to go with a narrow 2-1 victory for Liverpool. Wolves versus Palace. Wolves are dead bottom of the league with only 2 points to their name. So can the winless run of 15 winless run in the Prem, obviously that's taken into account last season, can it finally come to an end here under Rob Edwards? Handsome Rob. Can they get an instant manager bounce and turn it around? Look, Palace, in my opinion, should be higher in the league based on performances, and even coming up against perhaps a newly revitalised Wolves side, surely it still maybe goes in Palace's favour. Look, the problem I have with Wolves is their overall quality in the squad isn't amazing, and if they avoid relegation at this point, it would almost be a miracle, as I don't think any team has actually survived after only achieving 2 points in 11 games. I mean, someone correct me there if I'm wrong, but if there is, it must only be the one team, or 2 at best, over the 33 years that the Prem's been going. So right now they are actually on target to beat Derby's record. I mean, look, Southampton were a similar area last year. In fact, I think Southampton had more points at this stage last year. It just shows how poorly Wolves are actually doing. So I think I'm going to have to go with a Palace win here, regardless of it being at Molineux with the new manager. I think it's got to be a 2-1. I think Palace are also susceptible to conceding a goal as well, so I feel like they will still get on the score sheet, Wolves. But yeah, 2-1 is the final score for this one. Newcastle versus Man City, and Newcastle definitely be grateful to be at home, with their away form being awful and yet to win on the road. I mean, I say awful because the expectation is obviously, of course, very high for Newcastle, and not beating teams such as Leeds, Brentford, and West Ham away is going to be highly disappointing for them. Even their home form hasn't been amazing, with them sitting in 14th for the home form table. So although I do take into account, they've already played Arsenal, Liverpool, where the performances were, pretty good, and a little bit unlucky to have come away with defeats in both those games, especially the Liverpool one. But they're not beating teams overly comfortably either, even at home right now. Man City now won 4 in a row in all competitions, and usually the first half of the year is when they tend to, shall we say, suffer more points dropped, whereas Arsenal have notoriously dropped off in the second half of the season. So it will be interesting to see how it all plays out. Should there be, let's say, less than a 5-point gap, a 5-point gap between City and Arsenal at Christmas? I don't know if it's like a tractor boy type of impersonation that's going for there, but a 5. So, yeah, it will be interesting anyway. I mean, Arsenal's squad depth has obviously improved massively, and that could be the difference maker this year. But look, City, I don't think we need to say much more about them right now, who have scored no less than 3 goals in the last 4 matches in all comps. So, City here, for me, to win this 2-1, I do expect a reasonably good performance from Newcastle though, but I just think the current form of Haaland is ridiculous again. I think he'll probably score even both goals here for Man City if we're being honest about it. But there is a world where we could see this being a 3-2. We have seen it in history where it's been a 3-3 and a 3-2 at St James's Park. So I won't be against going for even another 3.5 goals bet for this particular game. Leeds versus Aston Villa. And the whole song of Leeds are falling apart again is probably true right about now. I just released a fairly heated video, shall we say, where I was really cheesed off, to be honest with you, and I think you almost saw angry side, but I'll let you be the judge of that. So if you want to check that out, then please do. The link will be in the description for that and the Liverpool video that I've recently done. So you have Leeds currently sitting 16th above the relegation zone, but our performances away from home have been terrible, especially the last 2 against Brighton and Forest. Something has to change, and if Farke isn't willing to adapt to the league, for me and a lot of Leeds fans now, he has to go. I do like Daniel Farke's man. I never want change. I never want a manager to go, but he just isn't adapting, and right now he's showing why Prem teams don't shortlist him. So, look, Daniel Farke, if you see this video, which you're obviously not, but if for any reason you did, please be adaptable, change, be proactive, not reactive, is all I'll say. Now, Villa are looking very good in the league again, bar their result at Anfield, of course, but I just feel for some reason that they always struggle at Anfield. It's one of those mentality things where Anfield just swallows certain teams up, and Villa seems to be one of those. So, look, I won't consider that game too much and factor it in. The thing that we do have to actually note, though, going into this away fixture, is they haven't had too many away matches in the league, with only 2 in the past 7 weeks. So it's a little tricky to... In fact, actually, I think by the time the game comes around, it would have been 2 straight months. So, yeah, it is a little tricky to judge their away form. If you are baiting on it so far, they sit on 5 points from 5, which surprisingly actually puts them in 9th in the table, which does go to show how dominant home teams have been so far this season. With all the stuff that I have said about Leeds and Fart recently, at home I still think Leeds can do something here, and it wouldn't be surprising if we somehow win this game. But I will split it down the middle with a 1-1. Arsenal versus Spurs, and it is the old fierce London derby, and Arsenal are sitting nicely at the top, undefeated in 14 games in all competitions now, where they hit a small blip at the Stadium of Light where it looked like they surely were going to go and win the match after overturning the 1-0 deficit. But credit to Sunderland, who just never gave up. And look, last time I predicted Arsenal to win, but I did say that Sunderland could get a draw here because they'd have got into that game full of confidence, no fear. And look, they played exactly like that. No fear, full of confidence. And it was probably a deserved draw, really, for Sunderland, because Arsenal were quite poor in the first half, to be fair, and were deservedly losing, I would say. So, yeah, I think draw was probably the fair result all in all there. Now, ultimately, you would feel that is just a blip. And sure, they'll get back to winning ways here. Although Spurs, on the flip side, have been better away from home. And something we do have to factor in for this derby, where they themselves are 6 without defeat in all competitions. So, surprisingly, I've heard Frank has had some stick from Spurs fans about his style of play. But surely after a turgid Prem season last year, it's about the results, where the performances will come over time. Now, the thing about Thomas Frank is he's a pragmatic manager who will adapt to the opposition rather than have the same style of play for every single match, which is probably a good fit for Spurs right now. And I feel like there needs to be more gratitude. He's gotten 5th in the league right now. So, look, it's not looking too shabby, is it, for Spurs? So, this particular game, though, yes, it's a London derby, and you never truly know what can happen in some of these matches, but I do feel like it will be a stretch. I can always see Arsenal winning this. I can see them being really up for this one, so I'm going to give them a few goals here. I'm going to go 3 for Arsenal and 1 for Spurs. Bringing us on to the final game of Game Week 12, which is at Old Trafford, Man United versus Everton, for which Man United sit in 7th now and will be happier after this international break compared to the last two, where they were much further down the league and with iffy performances and results. Look, obviously, not having any European competition is surely the difference maker here, and so it should, and so you would expect from Man United. Look, they've got no other competitions to worry about. It is just the Prem, and so the expectation for them here is to get a top 5 spot. The biggest questions for Man United at the moment is their defensive record, where even though they're getting results, they do seem to be conceding frequently, with 2 goals conceded in minimum in each of the last 3. So that will need to be addressed. Everton, I thought, may have been a little higher up in the table by now, find themselves in 13th. On paper, they had a very good transfer window, but the strikers are just having an absolute nightmare, aren't they? So they'll be looking at other players once more in the team to provide the goals, because right now it doesn't look like it's coming from Tieno Barrio better. So, look, the goals, it's got, you're looking at Ndai, aren't you? You're looking at Grealish, who hasn't really contributed much recently. He's a bit of an assist merchant usually, but when your strikers aren't performing, can you really put the onus on Grealish too much? Probably not. So you might be looking here, maybe a defence, well, like a Michael Keane scoring from a header, Ndai scoring, maybe a guy getting another goal. But I think here you've got to base it on the home versus away form, which seems to be the trend so far this season. So it has to go in favour of the team with 4 wins and 1 defeat at Old Trafford. So I think they'll go over the line with a 1-0 win and a clean sheet due to how poor Everton have been in front of goal, regardless of Man United's leaky defence. I think Everton are one of those where you can potentially see yourself getting a clean sheet. So 1-0 is the final score and the end of the predictions for Game Week 12. So once again, thank you for listening. Please whack a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, comment your predictions below. Have a good week and an even better weekend, and we'll see you in the next one for Game Week 13. But until then, bye for now.